wanted to say a special hello to all of you watching the movie scores. I hope you enjoy the interviews that I just did, and most importantly, keep listening to movie scores. Keep listening to movie scores. They are the soul of the movie. Thank you.
¿Cómo es el inicio de Richard en la música de cine?
So let's begin at the beginning. How was the beginning in film music?
In film music, well, actually, before film music, this is important. When I was 11 years old, my father, I lived in Europe, lived in Rome
Yes.
for many years, and my father, he was shooting a film in Spain. And we came, during the summer, we came to Madrid. And the first night in Madrid, we went and had a wonderful meal, and then afterwards we walked across the square to a flamenco show. And for the first time, I got to hear the guitar, the flamenco guitar. And I was
Shock.
absolute shock. The next day, I went and bought myself a guitar, and that's what started me in music, was that one flamenco show in Madrid. So Spain is kind of special for me in that sense, even though it wasn't film score, it was still music, right? And that's what started it. Was that one flamenco show, hearing that guitar. That was
Me gustaría preguntarte, Richard, ¿qué recuerdo tiene del padre, ¿no? de Albert Mann? Él hizo varias producciones en Roma, Italia, y una específicamente, The Avenger, en 1962.
Steve Reeves, I think. Or Gordon Scott?
Yes, Steve Reeves.
Steve Reeves, yeah.
Sí, hacía el personaje de Eneas.
Sí.
De leyenda.
Legend of Aeneas.
Exacto.
Right.
En ese film, tu hermano, Charles, hizo un pequeño papel.
Yes.
¿Entiendes español? ¿Entiendes español? Do you understand Spanish?
Italiano sí, español poco.
Vale, quería saber si tú también estuviste involucrado en ese film, en esa película, o tuviste algún papel, o en alguna otra producción de tu padre, interviniste como actor o como extra.
So you were asking about your father and his career,
Right.
a lot of films in Europe, and then he talked about this particular film, The Avenger, with
Avengers, right, and then The Legend of Aeneas, yes.
That your brother did a small role there.
Yes, my brother played the son of Aeneas. That's right, that's right.
Yeah. So he was wondering if you were involved somehow with that production or in any other productions that your father was.
Well, in that production, my brother played the son of Aeneas. I just played one of the villagers, right? I was there, a little boy, right? And so I didn't have any big role, just one of the villagers. But before that, before Italy, we lived for 6 months in Sweden, and my father did a movie in Sweden, beautiful movie actually, called Face of Fire, with Richard Widmark, Theodore Mikkel, I think Sam Jaffe and his wife, a couple other people. And my brother and I, we played the two kids in that movie in several scenes. We were both, I don't know, 6 and 8 years old, right? We were in bunk beds in the little house. So that was the very first time. Then we moved to Paris for about a year, and then to Italy, where all the movies started happening. So the very first role my brother and I were both in together was in Face of Fire, which we did in Sweden.
Okay.
Then Italy.
Okay. ¿Y tu padre influenció tu carrera como compositor o te quería llevar por otro lado? ¿Te apoyó en el tema de la música?
Well, my father always loved music. We would often play music at home lots of Beethoven, Brahms, many different classical music. So from an early age, I was always listening to music. In fact, when we lived in Paris for 1 year, I used to love to come home from school, and I loved Beethoven's Ninth and Fifth Symphony. Those were my favorite ones. I would come home from school and put the phonograph of one of the two symphonies on, and I'd climb up on the table, right? And I would air conduct both symphonies. I did this all like 2-3 times a week, and our maid, she was so taken with this that she made me a tuxedo and bought me a baton, right? So then I could come home from school and get my tuxedo and all this. I was like, what, 6 or 7 years old, right? But so the love of music was always there. And of course, being brought up with films, I love films. But the idea of making music for films, I was much too young to really think like that. So initially, after Spain and the flamenco guitar, I learned guitar, and then I started forming various bands in Italy, more rock and roll, jazz, things like that. And then when I was like from 15 to almost 18, I toured around Italy and parts of Europe with my bands. So I was very young, but I was touring around Europe, which was a lot of fun. But it wasn't movie scoring, it was bands, rock and roll and jazz and all that. When I came back to the United States in late 1970 or 71, I think 70, and I had in Europe, I had some pretty good success with my bands, but in coming back to the United States, I realized at that point that everybody wanted to be rock and roll stars. Everybody wanted to do that in the 70s, everybody. And I thought, it's not going to work. If I'm going to pursue music, I have to study it formally, right? And so then I started going to music school and then music conservatory, and started formally learning music. And after about 4 years or so, maybe a little bit more than that, I always loved film. That's how I grew up with my father, right? But I had this love for music, and one day I said, you know what, if I love music this much, but I love films as much, how can I marry them? And then it's like a light bulb went off. How about music for films? Right? And that's it. That's an idea. And as soon as I thought of that, then within 6 months, I did my first score, which was for a film called Laser Blast, with Joel Smith, who was Jerry Goldsmith's son, who I had hired in previous years as a sound guy, because I was doing some production work on some of the movies. But this was going to be our very first score that we did together, and was our first score. That was 1978, and that's how it started. That was the very first one.
hablaron con Irwin Jablans para convencerlo que les diera la oportunidad de componer la banda sonora de la película. ¿Es cierto eso?
Well, I'll be very honest. The number one, the movie had no music budget, right? No music budget. So they needed something cheap, right? That's number one. Number two was they thought, Irwin Jablans thought, you know what? Maybe we could capitalize on Joel Goldsmith's name being the son of the great Jerry Goldsmith, right? So that was their thinking, and they didn't have any money, so they said, we'll give you $1,000 for the whole score. You have to do everything.
Y poco tiempo para componer, ¿no?
And a short time.
Short, yeah, I don't know, 3 weeks?
3 weeks.
So 3, maybe 4, I don't remember exactly, but yeah, not a lot of time. And this was, well, number one, no money, just $1,000, right? So no money. And this was way before MIDI. MIDI didn't even exist. So everything was recorded live, right? Now, because I had been to music school, I'd had a few years of formal training and all this, I could write things, down, and I knew what I was doing. So I actually wrote most of the score down, and then we would go into the studio and on various synthesizers, I would perform the notes and put it into a big 24-track audio tape. Very old school, right? Way before MIDI, and it turned out very good for our very first film,
Re-Animator. El tema principal, muy parecido a Psycho de Hermano. Hubo toda una polémica, muchos que decían que se había copiado. Para mí es un homenaje clarísimo a Herman, pero lo quiero escuchar un poco de palabras del autor.
Well, the main thing, yes, it was my intention. Yes, obviously, right? But what was very Herman-esque in there wasn't so much the theme; it was the classic Psycho motifs, right? Not that, but the that part. But then I put my own themes in there. So like in the beginning, that's my theme, right? But it's behind what is a classic Herman, right? And then it goes to the B section, which is also classic Herman, with an altered theme and orchestration by me. But it was 100% intentional. Because the movie, I related the character in the movie, Herbert West, right, the main character of the movie, as a total psycho, right? And I wanted the audience to think like that as well, to be able to relate to a genius maniac, a genius psycho. What better musical imprint would there be than using a couple of the motifs from Psycho, but putting my own themes in it. So I put, like the drums, so it made it Herman-esque, but funny, quirky, weird, you know, all of that. So it was intentional. Now here's what actually happened. I was very insistent that in the end title credits of the film, that they put a credit saying, I forgot what it was, with acknowledgement and humble apologies to Bernard Herrmann.
Te lo iba a preguntar y al final no se puso, no se introdujo esa frase finalmente en la película.
It didn't end up in the movie. Therefore, people didn't quite understand what I was doing. Now, we did put it, when the CDs came out, we put it on the CD.
Oh, Galwin. It's starting again.
Una pregunta sobre Troll.
Troll.
La música que compusiste para cuando los Troll cantan, ese tema coral, ¿cómo se te ocurrió poner eso?
Well, that scene, the music, I had to compose the music way before they shot the movie, because the idea was that the trolls were singing to the song, right? So I composed the music and recorded the music 5-6 months before they ever shot anything. So my inspiration was strictly from reading the script and my kind of passion for fantasy and magical things, right, and all that. My favorite things in movies generally, I love fantasy. Not so much horror, but I like fantasy. So, like Harry Potter type stuff, right? That type of stuff. I love that. So the inspiration really came from knowing the story and enjoying the whole concept of that type of fantasy.
Razor sharp, the pit and the pendulum. Stuart Gordon, the director of Re-Animator, and Edgar Allan Poe, author of The Raven, create a new vision of classic terror, The Pit and the Pendulum. Starring Lance Henriksen from Aliens and Near Dark, Jeffrey Combs of Re-Animator, and the Devil's Oliver Reed. The Pit and the Pendulum. It's a slice of history.
Para componer tu música de Pit and the Pendulum, ¿tuviste presente o tomaste como inspiración o la tuviste en cuenta? ¿Tuviste en cuenta la música de Les Baxter para la versión anterior de Corman?
I know that Roger Corman did The Pit and Pendulum 20 years before, right? I'd never seen it. Even today, I still haven't seen it. I know that he did it, but I never
O sea,
saw
la
it.
música no tiene nada que ver, es plenamente original, no se basó ni se inspiró para nada en eso.
Right, no.
What were your inspirations of being independent?
Well, in that case, growing up in Rome was a big benefit because I grew up around Catholicism. So, also when I was in music school, I studied choral works and was in a choral group, so I always liked voices and things like that. So the inspiration, well, one was again, I like the period having to do with the Spanish Inquisition, how it ties into Catholicism, even though, you know, it was terribly twisted, you know, with the Spanish Inquisition, torquemada, all this talk. So I like how it was twisted, and I also was inspired by the fact that ultimately this was a love story, right? So you had all this horrible stuff happening, and once again, it's all for a woman and a man's insane desire, albeit a bishop or archbishop, torquemada, even supposedly the great religious leaders, they're human, right? So they look what a disaster he created. So you have, so one was, I had a good sense of the clergy and how the clergy and Catholicism worked within the church. I had been brought up around that. That was one part of it. The fact that there's a love story involved, that was another part of inspiration. There was a darkness to it that I liked, that I incorporated. But what was very important to me in Pendulum, and especially towards the end, it's actually very beautiful. The music is a very beautiful piece, with solo trumpet and everything in the choir. So it's like almost inspirational. If anything was sort of a bit of an inspiration, I would say a little bit of Miklos Rosa in the way he treated Ben-Hur in certain places. That I always loved Ben-Hur, right? And I think there was some influence of that approach with Miklos Rosa, and subsequently his protege Jerry Goldsmith, right, probably had some influence as well when it came to some of the darker side. So it was a combination of those ingredients.
Has sido muy fiel a tu hermano Charles en toda su carrera, has estado con él. ¿Eso te significó haber tenido que rechazar, por ejemplo, otras propuestas para películas que no estén dentro de lo que es la clase B y haber entrado quizás en alguna producción más grande, alguna superproducción? ¿Tuviste que rechazar trabajos por estar fiel al trabajo de Charles?
Yes and no. Yeah, there were times where I couldn't do something because I was committed to do something for my brother. That's true. Not all the time, but definitely true. I was supposed to, at one point I was supposed to do the movie The Last Starfighter, right?
Craig Safin.
And Craig Safin ended up doing the original. The movie actually was tracked with all my music from Metal Storm originally, see, which was interesting. And they all wanted me to do it. Politics got involved and schedule got involved, and then Craig ended up doing. By the way, I think it's probably one of his best scores. I think it's a fantastic score. So I'm sad that I couldn't do it, but I'm very happy that he ended up doing it because he did a fantastic score to that. Yeah. So I always felt a commitment first to family, and then this started way back with my father, right? And when my brother started producing films, my father was always involved with all that until he passed away. And so it was always I guess call it a family business, right? You know, so we all sort of came up together and we had to die, we could die together. It's la familia.
Pero se llevaban bien, o sea, te llevabas bien con tu padre y con Charles también, con tu hermano, te llevabas bien porque para...
We got along together, you know, the family you were very close.
Always very close. Not to say we didn't have problems, like any family, right? I mean, I would get into arguments, you know, if I said, I have to have an orchestra on this, and no money, you can't have anything here to use one violin. I can't, you know, those sorts of things, right? So those battles happened all the time, right? That's what it is, all the time. But I always felt a sense of, I felt my contribution to that created empire and then Full Moon Films. I think from the music standpoint, I felt that my contribution was important to lift those movies up into a different, not just crappy B movies, but something of more significance. And so I think in that sense, I've succeeded, but I still fight to this day, right? I mean, the movie that's coming out soon actually is going to be at Stegis in October, the premiere of Primevals, a very big movie, 40 years in the making, 40. And so that one I fought very hard for and managed to record it with part orchestra. I had a big string section, 50 strings on that one. Yeah, I recorded that in Bratislava. So it's a very big, spectacular type of score. I had to fight very hard for that.
Hundreds of centuries are looking down at us.
Dungeon Master, trabajaste con Shirley Walker.
Yeah, I worked with
También
Shirley.
habías trabajado en Gullis. ¿Y qué? Metterstone. Exacto. ¿Qué recuerdos tienes de Shirley?
One, Shirley and her husband, they both died much too young, unfortunately. But when I met Shirley, she was an orchestrator in Hollywood, and she had been recommended as an orchestrator. When I met her, I realized not only that she was very talented, but also she was quite a good conductor. So when I first hired her as a conductor for Metal Storm, not an orchestrator. I had 3 orchestrators on Metal Storm other than myself. With a massive amount of music, 70 minutes of music, and big orchestra and synthesizers. So, and I think the whole score I only had like 12 days to do like 80 minutes of music. It was crazy.
12 days.
Yeah, it was insane because that movie, it had to come out at the exact same time as Jaws 3D. They were used, because it was 3D, they were using the same projection lenses. It was insane. So anyway, but Shirley, I hired her to conduct Metal Storm. She did such a great job. We struck up a good friendship, and then I hired her additionally to do some orchestrations with me. And we subsequently, I hired her to help me on some of Dungeon Master. I also brought her over to England to record music for Ghost Warrior, which was a Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. So we struck up a good friendship and working relationship where she orchestrated for me, and she composed various cues for like Dungeon Master, and she was one of those pioneers, one of the first women to really start breaking through in Hollywood. Thankfully we have lots of women composers and orchestrators. It's very different today, but back then there were almost none. She was one of 2 or 3. That was it. So, but she was nothing but good memories of her.
mencionaste a Miklos Rosa, Jerry Goldsmith. ¿Qué otros, además de Herman, ¿no? Obviamente creo, qué otros compositores influenciaron tu estilo
Not too many, but significant ones. Maurice Jarre, you know, when you look at films like the David Lee movies, like Dr. Zhivago, Lawrence of Arabia, these epic movies, if those movies didn't have that music, we wouldn't be thinking of them in the same way. They are the soul of those movies, and I consider music to be the soul of a movie. So definitely Maurice Jarre is up there. I know I'm going to leave out a few, but Korngold, going way back, right? Unbelievable.
Robin Hood, Seahawk,
Exactly. That's right. Crimson Pirate, all yeah, fantastic.
the classic.
Classic. So some of those definitely were influences. Not necessarily something that would be my style or I would incorporate. These are the things that inspired me to do film music. In that sense, of today's composers, I think today Thomas Newman's unbelievable. He's, I think, one of my all-time favorites. Fantastic stuff today. I mean, John Williams, we can all say John Williams, he changed movie scores for the better, obviously, great. But I would say, I think that probably one of the greatest film composers of the modern era has to go to Jerry Goldsmith, because he did so many unique and different styles and different things. I mean, not to take anything away from John Williams. John Williams does John Williams, right? You know, many variations of John Williams. Jerry Goldsmith has just done so many, such diverse things and inventive. I just think he's just a much more creative ilk. Not to take anything away from anybody, but I think of the modern era, he stands definitely in the top few. Also today, James Newton Howard is fantastic.
Para terminar, de tus propias bandas de sonido, ¿cuál es tu favorita o tus favoritos?
That's hard to say. Well, definitely in the top 5. Control is in the top 5. Okay, I really like Troll. Ghost Warrior, Pit and Pendulum probably, and Primevals, since it's coming up.
Yes, the last one.
Re-Animator, Dungeon Master. No.
I was not in my top, the ones that are close to my heart, right? No, I mean, I like them, I think they're good, nothing wrong with them. Like some of the cues from Dungeon Master are From Beyond. Definitely From Beyond. Yeah, that's another one. Okay. It's hard to pinpoint favorites. I ran into it years later. I was in Rome, and I was, I don't know if you were with me or not, we were having dinner at this wonderful restaurant. All of a sudden this guy tapped me on the shoulder, and he said, I wanted to introduce myself. I was one of the judges at Stegis, and I wanted you to know that, that the score was wonderful, and congratulations and all that. And I said, oh, what's your name? He said, Vittorio De Sica, Jr. That was Vittorio De Sica, the son who was one of the judges at that festival. You know, this was like 15 years later. I was at a restaurant in Rome. I said, thank you. Funny.
Bueno, Richard, muchísimas gracias por esta entrevista.
Thank you.
Nada,
por la oportunidad de entrevistarte y haber pasado este momento gratísimo contigo. Gracias, David, por tu colaboración.
Well, thank you.